now, part two. It's been a few days, but I still want to do it while it was fresh in my mind. I've done the best that I can to figure out if the trial is over, because we're not supposed to talk about it during the trial, and I figured the worst thing I can do is actually have a physical digital recording of me talking about it. So I'm going to do my best to schedule this in the future and hope that the trial is over. I couldn't figure it out. They were live streaming it because that's a thing that happens, is that they will live stream court cases. But after they did it on the second day and the judge said it would maybe take 2 days, I never saw it again after that. It is not on the searching that I can find. And then as it turns out, you have to pay real money to go find out the verdict of a court case, which is not worth it for me to just go find out. I just wanted to know. But anyway, so we talked about before the process of like going in and then them showing us the video. Everything was fine. I really didn't wind up sitting there for very long. I took all my stuff like I was going to be there the whole day, and I was, but I wasn't out in the waiting area the whole day where I could be playing on my, ROG Ally or reading a book or whatever it was. I actually was going to start by reading I had a webcomic on my tablet that I downloaded for offline viewing because I knew I wouldn't have internet. And I was going to start there, but there were a pair of women behind me who started kind of getting giggly and laughing and doing that. And that's fine. But that immediately was like, well, this is annoying, and I'll just put in my earbuds then and I'll play Monster Hunter. I barely played at all before they called us. But yeah, they came in and explained. There was a lot of people called in. They immediately let go of, and I apologize if I'm repeating. It's been a few days, so I don't even remember what I recorded from previous. I'm just trying to remember as best I can the event as it happened. So they had over 100 of us there, and they let go, I don't know, like 20 people right off the top. So I'd say there were more like 120 because I think that's what she said. She said 100 to 120, and then they started calling us out, calling up numbers in groups of 25. And the first group has to go up in a very particular order because that's the jurors. That's the actual thing. I think I may have said that, where they when you go into the courtroom, you are put into the box, which is where the jury goes, and everybody's lined up and they have numbers. And then the reason that they pulled you up and they have that stuff is because they have looked at your pre-screening questionnaire. So they are trying to pick the best people based on what they have there for the case. And there are 3 types of cases. There is, I forget all 3. There's something about civil, something else, and criminal maybe? Was civil the smallest one? Basically, it's the number of jurors needed. And it's either 3 people or 6 people or 12 people. A criminal case is 12 people. And that's what I was going in for. That's a weird way to phrase it, but that's what it was. When we got called into ours, it was for a criminal case. And now I can talk about it a little bit more. The man accused was accused of 4 counts of something that were all related to, there was a theft maybe of stealing a specific, like a drill, and then there was a threatening, and there was self-defense involved, and there was something to that effect, and not entirely, I don't know all the details, and I also don't want to go into all the details to be honest with you with that, but I will note that I can say it was a criminal case for that purpose, something involved with self-defense, and all of that really played into the questions that they wound up asking the potential jury. So they get into it and they go through all the, can you be legally disqualified from this case for all of these reasons or anything? And then people start talking about, it was one of their questions were like, are you related to anybody involved in this? No. Do you have family members in law enforcement? And several people had family members in law enforcement. And that's where we started getting into the more complicated, tell me who's your family member in law enforcement. Will that affect your decision? That's a lot of what was like, where the line of questioning started with everybody was simply, are you going to trust a police officer just because they are a police officer? And people were honest, and some people said yes, and some people said no, and we're, sitting there watching this and doing all this stuff. Me personally, because I was sitting there paying attention and supposed to be doing what I was doing, and I'm answering the questions, I have had both positive and negative with law enforcement over the years. I am not going to judge them more so than anyone else. I'm not going to give them a leg up, but I'm also not going to knock them down. They are just a person until proven otherwise. If they seem like they are lying or their stories are a certain way, I'm going to believe one way or the other, but just base, neutral, which is what they were looking for. So I would have answered that, I think, the way they wanted, because they were pretty, like, the way that they were asking about it, that is what they expected. And there was a lot of having to repeat the rules of what was explained at the front, because, like, between the, and I get it. let me just say that it was a weird feeling to be as calm as I was, because in any other situation with the amount of like just being in a public place and the amount of people that are around and everything that's there and going through my head, and then also the expectation and responsibility of, that's where I really got upset about the other people around me who were kind of, why I was calling it the peanut gallery. I was talking about that last time. Regardless of anything else, they said the case had, the charges had occurred on, when it actually happened, 2023. We're in 2025, so it's been over a year. It's more like a year and a half or a year and change. Has this man been in jail this entire time? I hope not. I'm pretty sure the way that works is he would have been arrested because there was a police officer there for the defense, and that was, or the prosecution, I should say. There was a police officer for the prosecution. The defense was the lawyers and then the guy accused, who had to just sit there, didn't say a word the whole time, and doesn't have to. That, we'll get to that. They, where's I going with that? I'm pretty sure that he would have been arrested for it. Regardless of what happened, somebody who, the defendant at that point, or no, the prosecution, what is it? Oh my God. I'm not a lawyer. I am not a lawyer. He would have been arrested, the accused. I'm pretty sure, but maybe out on bail, on bond, on something like that, so that he could, if he didn't have prior convictions or anything like that, which they did not go into. They simply explained to us the premise of what was going on, what was the point of that, and left out everything else, obviously. There was very limited information. You were just needed to know that, and then you were given the rules of, like, because of that, here are the reasons why you have to do what you do. That was basically the overview that the judge gave when we first got in there. Then they went through the line of questioning. And there were two major points. One was self-defense. There was a whole thing about self-defense and what your beliefs in it were almost, and stuff. And there was a lot of repeating questions and a lot of asking people the same thing, which again, you have to make sure you check with everybody about it. Yes, that purpose, like, they're trying their best. They only have a limited amount of time. They obviously can't sit down and have a full interview and get to know the person that they are trying to select for a jury to figure out whether or not they're going to be a good fit, or if they have biases that are going to sway it one way or the other. Obviously, both sides of them are trying to do a job. The prosecution's job is to find the guy guilty. The defendant is to find him not guilty. That's kind of how it goes. It's really less about the truth and more about what they can prove. And that's the whole thing. There was a lot of that too. There was a lot of, and it's specific wording, and that's where it kind of gets nitpicky, and I can understand why some people didn't enjoy that as much, but I get why they do that kind of stuff. Somebody gave an answer to they were like, so you are comfortable with the fact that this man, as he's sitting here right now, this is the prosecution, they started out first, but he's referring to the defendant. He says, as he sits right there, completely innocent, and it's up to me and entirely my job to prove this. And the entire burden of proof lies on, and people had answered questions about that, being like, well, I mean, why would he be here if he wasn't guilty? I was like, all right, you can be excused. Come on. That is not how it works. It's literally what the way that the law says. And, I was talking to one lady at one point who was a parent who said, there are two sides and everything, and you'd want to hear both. And that was another point. That was the two main points. So the self-defense point was a lot of like, the right to defend yourself, and whether or not you have to, in good faith, basically disengage, which I understand the law to be that way. If you have the opportunity to just walk away, you should do that. If it's not safe, that's different. But if you have a full, complete opportunity to walk away, that's how I think that should be handled. Obviously, I don't know. I know there's a stand your ground. I know there's things like that, but that seems like the easiest way to resolve it. And that's what I was trained to do. So that's what I would do in that situation. Thankfully, I'm not in that situation, so I don't have to find out what fight or flight would happen, because that's another situation that would doing that. But anyway, that was a lot of like self-defense, because clearly there was a self-defense case there, and there were people who were excused because they were in very similar situations. Someone who was in retail, and who had been robbed at knife point, and this was another, or at gunpoint or something like that. There were multiple people who had been in a situation like that, and so they wanted their opinion very specifically and seriously, and they talked to them, and I think they wound up excusing them anyway, because at the end of the day, no matter how much they say, I won't let that influence me. you're probably going to have, and that was something that was very, they let a guy go because they were like, would you, like, they wanted to confirm. They're like, to be fully honest, and that's perfectly fine. Would this not essentially trigger you to be in that same thing? And you're going to lean more towards the person who is not being accused of the assault that's happening here. Like, if you've gone through that, how would you not do that? That's just what it is. And it was really fascinating to learn all of these things. The other point was, this is why I wanted to do it as soon as possible, because I'm starting to already forget exactly the sequence of events. I mean, it was a 6-hour day with everything in there. There was a lot of talk about not just the self-defense aspect of it, but whether or not you would just believe a police officer. I said that already. There was the main other sticking point that we really hammered down to was simply whether or not you had to hear from someone. And it came up at one point, and I don't remember which side brought it up first, but it basically oh, wait, before we get in, okay, now see, this is where I'm jumping all over the place, and I apologize, but I'm doing the best that I can here. Somebody who talked about, and I was talking about the nitpicky way that they did that, and somebody said they really got stuck onto, and it just became like, well, let's clear it up for everybody. Let's just read it, let's discuss. And it actually was to the point where the judge stepped in, essentially, because people were just, somebody responded in a way where he said something about beyond reasonable doubt, which is how they are supposed to prove it. And they were like, well, beyond all doubt. The potential juror answered back with something, and they phrased it as beyond all doubt. And it was like, no, hold on. What do you mean when you say all doubt? And they kind of, and it was a lot of like, oh, whoops, I said that, now I'm on the spot. And people tried to back out of that, specifically be like, oh, I think I just got confused and I did that. And he's like, no, let's dive into it, explain what you mean, and try to get, and I can understand why some people would get tired of just listening to a conversation like that, but it's really important, right? Because beyond all doubt is very different from beyond reasonable doubt. And that was a whole distinction that had to be made. And so, like, that was a lot of back and forth, and then it was a question of raise your hand if you felt differently, if you did, and let's go talk to you now, and let's figure out what's going on here. And just, that was the process. And there's a reason for that process, because beyond all doubt is that there's not a doubt in your mind. And then they had to go through what reasonable doubt means, which I understood from the get-go, sure, but I'm not the only person in the room, and I wasn't even the one up in the box potentially to be jury. I was in the gallery waiting to be picked if that happened, if they dismissed enough people and my number came up from whatever order they'd put them in, because I'm sure that's how that works. So there was a lot of that, and I understand why that can be tiring to some people, but still, it's important, and I think it was, a good experience. The self-defense was a lot of it, finding out whether people had a previous experience or anything like that. If you had law enforcement that you were just immediately going to believe in your family or something like that, or if you had a negative or a positive experience with law enforcement, I was able to ascertain several things about this case right off the bat. So obviously you were going to be hearing from a police officer. He was there for the prosecution. That was the witness. That was the only witness that was there, which is interesting because and I don't know if they got called in at a later point, but the person who was accusing, they weren't there. And they very much, the other main thing that really was a sticking point is that they clearly, once one side brought it up, and I don't remember who did it, lots of people had opinions on whether or not the defendant had to speak. I don't remember how that came up, because at some point, I was doing my best to pay attention, but at some point it came up, and then all of a sudden that was the sticking point, and everybody needed to talk about it. Both sides, defense and prosecution, wanted to know that question because several people had, and it just became a sticking point the whole time. And people had opinions. Men and women on the jury were like, no, if they are innocent, they should be talking. They should be able to tell their side of the story. They should be able to say that. And they go, right. But in a court of law, you understand that is not how this works, right? You understand that they have the right to remain silent. They never actually said that, which was interesting, but they very much hammered down to find out whether or not people were going to judge this man on the fact that he did not step up and give testimony. And I clearly, from all of that was going to be a sticking point in the case. He wasn't going to, and you don't have to. That's a whole thing, that he is sitting there innocent until they can prove otherwise. And he doesn't have to take the stand, and he doesn't have to say anything. And no one seemed to understand that from the amount of people who were giving answers that were different than that. And I understand that's truthful and that's honest and that's what you want. And yes, you could say that and go, and that's a lot of like, okay, yes, I understand that might be what you want in the real, in your life and in a but it's not the real world, and the real world is different from a court case. And that's where I think the like came into there was a funny moment where somebody was like, was it it was questioning a certain person about what it would take for them to render a guilty or an innocent verdict or something like that. And they were like, well, it would be based on facts. And they were kind of giving vague answers. And he was like, okay, the prosecution goes into a funny little story that I don't know if he tells this to everybody, because the people who were laughing were not the ones who would have been in the courtroom with him every day. So I don't doubt that this is something that he says, but like, this entire thing wound up being like a full 5 to 10 minute conversation where he tells a little story about like he has a wife and a dog, and his dog is a blanket eater. That's what he calls him. And he comes home and he finds holes in the blanket where he's eating the blanket, and and like all of this, and doing the entire, and so he talks about that and what it would be for evidence. And it was like, well, the lady says, just because he's got a history, you don't know. What if the dog didn't do it? What if the holes were there when you bought it? What if you bought it secondhand? What if you did? And the guy's like, okay, well, let's pretend that I bought it brand new, and we do all this and and then he says at one point, what if I brought it, and this was the moment where I was like, if in my head, in this moment, if I was on the stand doing this stuff, assuming I wouldn't be too nervous to do it, I'd make a joke right now just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, because it's clearly he's joking around. But he says, what if he brings his wife in, hauls her into court, makes her go up there, take the oath, do all this stuff, and then give testimony that she witnessed the dog eating the blanket? To which was very funny, and everyone jokes and things like that. And that's where I probably would have made a joke being like, so you got a really good marriage, huh? But not appropriate. Might have gotten in trouble for that. Wouldn't have mattered. Wasn't up on the box anyway. I don't know what would have happened if I was up there. I think the nerves may have been considerably more, because now you're talking into a microphone, which I would probably have been comfortable with. That's the whole thing's being recorded. So that's where, they're passing a mic around to all the different people. There was not actually a court, what are they, the typing stenographer? There wasn't one of those because it was just being recorded. So they just had to make sure everybody was on mic whenever they were speaking, which was not, they had a handheld. They were just passing it back and forth for the jury. And then, obviously the judge and everybody, both sides and on the podium, had microphones. Wasn't a big deal. Anyway, I really, from a technical aspect, I would have loved to know who was working, if anyone, an audio device to make sure that everybody could be heard or adjusting it. I don't think they were, because the jury, certainly on that side, I think they just set up and go. But it was interesting to me that the prosecution would it's a gooseneck mic you've ever seen, on a podium, something like that, right? So it's a little one that comes up and it has that. And he adjusted it so it was more reasonable, something like that, And the other guy who came up stayed way far back, but it still picked him up just fine. It was slightly quieter, but it really wasn't much, which made me go, okay, so they are adjusting levels. Somebody's got, a mixer back behind there, and they're making sure that it's being recorded and everything's being heard. But no, I don't think so. I think they just set it and forget it, because the people on the who were passing the mic back and forth, some were talking louder and quieter and closer and further away, and that was all coming through like you would expect. Like, no one is live anyway. I worked in theater enough times and did things like that. That part of my brain goes, ooh, fascinating. But anyway, that was the person he was questioning with the whole story with the dog and the blanket eater did not pick up on the fact of I think they missed entirely when he said bring his wife in, who witnessed it. The kid just kept giving answers being like, well, it would depend on the evidence that they can prove and what they're doing. So that was a big there were multiple sticking points that just really hammered down. To me, I got from my observations, I understood that self-defense was going to be a part of it. They were clearly going to claim self-defense as part of the defense. They were going to claim that the defendant was not going to testify, which, again, I had no problems with. That's legally how it works. I understand that might not be satisfying to someone, and that's where you had the conversation with the parent who was like, if you have two children and they both have a different side of the story of who broke the vase, or whatever the case may be, or whatever, you want to hear from both of them, and if one of them doesn't want to talk about it, that might be the one who's guilty. That's not how it works in a court system and with the rules set up to try to have a pleasant society, which, again, I may have gone into this with some hesitation. I definitely, on the other side, see that there is a certain amount of respect and everything. And that man, like I said, he may have already been in prison. But regardless of what happened, pay attention and do your part here, because even if you don't care for the government, like me, or you don't care for anything that's going on, think about it on the very locust level. That man there is either innocent or guilty. You'd like to find out the truth as best as possible, but if you do it wrong, or if you're playing around and you're not paying attention, and you go up and you just vote the guilty because it's easier, and he was innocent, either way, pay attention. That guy's life isn't on the line. It's not really. They don't have the death penalty here, thankfully, but he could go to jail for a very long time. You will alter, regardless of anything else, you will alter this man's life. You can't pay attention for a couple hours because of that, instead of playing it on your phone. And I understand getting frustrated because of the questions repeating and everything, but like, come on. I didn't think it was that bad. I understand. I am just one. I can't speak for other people or their experiences or their attention deficits or whatever it may be, anything. I don't want to. But it did kind of go, oh yeah, that's right. This is why I don't like being out in public and I don't being around people. Society sucks, and people as a whole and in a general sense are just terrible. I did see. It's funny. There were two girls sitting ahead of me when we came back in from lunch at one point, and that was when I just happened to notice one of them, I think I mentioned last time, kept piping in, whispering her own opinions with something else, and the other one was just like straight-faced dead ahead. I was like, if I had, I don't know why, but I was just like, I like this one better. This one is more respectful of the situation going on with what's happening here, and this one is not so much. If I had to choose someone to, if we were like, all right, split into pairs, which I don't know why my brain goes to that, but I think it's because in karate you had to do that. In the summer camps I did, you had to do that. Like every group situation I've been in, first of all, I've always been in as a child. This is one of the few instances that I've had to go as a group to do something as a collective, as an adult. But instantly in my head, I was thinking about that there, being like, all right, if we pair up, because that's what I used to do. I was socially awkward. I'll say that. I was homeschooled. I did not have that kind of stuff. In Boy Scouts too, I would get in, and this is just the way that I work, I suppose, get into a social function of whatever's happening there and immediately assume we're going to get paired up. Who do I not want to be with, and who would be fine to like experience and like everything. I had to pair up for work jobs when they were like, we're going to role play to see some of the jobs I've had. They were like, all right, you're going to interact with a customer. You need to do this. We want to see how everybody improves and how they work on it. And we want to be able to give feedback and things like that. So everybody pair up. And it was like, well, we're just sitting at the same table. Anyway, that's just what, yeah. And so I thought of that situation with like, if we suddenly had to pair up, this person, please, not this person or some of the other people. But anyway, I don't know what happened by the end. So like we went through, there was lines of questioning. They went through all of that. They were dismissing people as they went and pulled more people up. In total, I think they probably ran through about 10. So 25 went up, 25 back with me. I think by the time we were done, it was down to 15 or 20, maybe at most, because I specifically can recall them excusing like 5 people throughout the process. Like one of them herself stepped up and said, I wouldn't be comfortable. And they're like, okay, well, this is why we ask. This is what we're trying to do. Not everybody's right for every court case. You're free to go. And then there was the one who came back from lunch and suddenly had a different change of tune, but specifically wanted to speak up even though they weren't allowed. They said, okay, so we go through the first, they were trying to get everything done, but the defense had to have their side of it too. And the defense hadn't even started by the time we took lunch. Or had they? No, they had. They were trying to push through. That was the point. By 12, that the prosecution had wrapped up. She'd called time, the judge, and was like, you're done. The defense needs to have it. Technically, it's only supposed to be 30 minutes. If we can just push forward through this 30 minutes, we might be able to just let everybody go. But there were more problems. There were more things, and there were things that they had to continue following up with. So they split the time for the defense, and we came back from lunch. The defense got to finish up questioning, and then they both got around after they had gone, okay, we're gonna they do like rounds almost of people were getting dismissed for reasons one way or the other as they were going, but that was not as common. That was specifically like situational. Someone didn't feel comfortable giving that stuff. They didn't think they'd be unbiased, anything, So they dismissed a couple people there. Then when we came back, there were only supposed to be 3 people. We came back from lunch. They tried. The judge really tried to get everybody out of there at lunch so that we didn't have to come back. But so we pushed through till almost 1. because it was supposed to be like 12:30. It kept going. It was doing that stuff, and she was like, "There's just we unfortunately everybody has to come back after lunch." So we went to lunch for an hour. It was like 1 to 2. Came back. The hour-long lunch break, which I went and bought some really expensive tacos. I thought I was going to a place more like a taco stand kind of situation. I just pulled up, on the maps, was like, quick, give me some food. I don't have long. What's close? What's good? Yes, I had, if you watched any of the stuff I did a trip beforehand, I had tacos the night before, I had tacos at breakfast, I had tacos for tacos for lunch the next day. I had a lot of tacos over the course of that. They were good. I don't regret any of that. But anyway, the only thing I regret is, unfortunately, it was really expensive. They were very small, very not filling tacos at more of like fancy sit-down restaurant. But that was because I just went to there thinking that would be good and sat down and was like, oh, this is like $15 for 3 tacos. And they are not, they were fine. They were tasty. Don't get me wrong. It was just the quantity. I very much walked out of there being like, well, I could eat another 3 or 6 or 12 tacos and that would be fine. And the price that I paid was not. Anyway, that's not the point of it. That's just the world that we live in and everything being more expensive. And I wouldn't go back to that place, but not because they were unfriendly or because the food wasn't good. It was simply the price to quantity ratio is not what I'm comfortable paying for. I would rather pay for an appropriate amount of money to get food that I'm more happy with than a smaller portion. Anyway, we went to lunch. We did that. We came back. And then there was really only another hour after that. But after they went and they did that. They had some people to excuse after that point. They specifically brought up 3 new people after they finished and the defense finished. And it was like, okay, these 3 people are done. We're going to call up 3 new ones. Now here's how it's going to go. They've had their chance to question everybody. They're only allowed to direct questions for a shorter period of time to these 3 specific people, and each person takes a turn. They went through all that. Somebody got dismissed. It was during only the 3 people that after lunch, somebody come back and been like, actually, I can't be biased. I can't be unbiased throughout all this. I have a husband I think I talked about that before, where they just and it was like, okay, I kind of get the feeling that you thought about this on lunch and want to just go home and not be a part of the court case. And all of a sudden you have a problem that you didn't mention before. Maybe you just didn't think about it. Maybe it actually was. I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt, innocent until all that. Maybe it's possible that they weren't just thinking it and didn't realize until a very specific question came up, was like, oh, I actually can't do this because I would be biased. But it seems kind of weird for that to not come up, because they literally questioned, I think, just about everybody. They ran out of time, so they got to a few people that clearly they were going to excuse anyway. Because again, they only need 12 and they have a selection of 25 with backups. So they did the 3 and a 4th person, immediately pulled up the new person, got to talk to that one. Everybody does have a chance to be questioned, regardless of how long this is going to take, as it is, because they have to. That's only fair. They get through all that. They're finally done. There's a lot of any time they need to approach the bench. Drove me just a little bit crazy. Anytime they need to approach the bench, they don't just mute the mics because you might hear something. So they actually play white noise for forever. I don't know how it sounds on the recording, the live stream or whatever. I didn't watch through any of that part because I had to work. But yeah, they're just playing white noise. And it's loud enough to the point where, yeah, you really can't hear except for the person sitting next to you talking up a storm. But it just got a little bit of like, ooh, I don't care for this white noise. It's kind of making my ears do a little, but anyway, chill up the spine. They kept doing that anytime they needed to approach, which was whenever they had an objection. That probably happened a half a dozen times about different lines of questioning, and they had to approach anytime they had to approach the bench, which totally makes sense. They're allowed to talk outside of the record, and the jury or anyone else is not supposed to hear what they're talking about. They're supposed to be. So they did that multiple times throughout the day. And they go up and they go, all right, now it's time to start whittling this down. We're going to start excusing people. At that point, I thought they'd be bringing more people up after their first round, because they officially have, unless anyone is excused for outside of the normal reasons, each side was allowed to excuse 5 people with cause and 5 people without cause, I think, in total. Or maybe they split up. I don't remember. There was a reason why they could do it. They have to give a reason that they're like, we want to dismiss this person. We do not want them on the jury. This whole process where they were each allowed to dismiss a certain number of people doing that, I thought had been going on, and that's where they were bringing more people up. No, that was at the end. That was just them choosing the 12 when they were whittling everything down, and they had to that, and they were like, all right, They it's fine. That was the actual process. Even though they'd probably done 5, 6, 7, I don't remember exactly how many people, even though there had been people excused and then re-brought up and everything, the actual process where they went, okay, no, no, no. And that would be that's where they're arguing each other, right? Because that's like, I've seen that on TV where they go, we want to excuse, and they go, no, you can't. And then, if there is a reason, and there's laws and reason, and that's why they had to approach the bench after all the questioning was done. But then they excused the people one at a time. It was this person, they had clearly already deliberated on this and talked with the judge and decided everything, because there was no like objection, we're getting rid, we're not okay with that. They had already agreed on the people both sides said yes to. And so then it was just a formality of coming back and going, okay, who's, the judge asking, okay, prosecution or okay, defense, who are you going to go? And we'll thank and excuse. It was very much a thank and excuse process of, because they want to thank you for your time and then excuse you because you're not fit for the case for whatever reason. And they don't have to tell you what that is. And they didn't say the reason for any of the people that they got rid of, but they absolutely did all they went all the way through of their first to 5 and then down to 5. And then the other side got to do that. And then they went back to because again, there were 2 reasons where they had cause or they didn't have cause, or they didn't have to specify. And that was I was reading a lot about that specifically, that process. There's a word for it that I do not remember. Voidor or something? Doivor? It was something like that. It kind of sounded French to me, and I don't speak French at all. But it's the process. That entire thing we did that day was the process of that terminology to question and find out and then excuse people. And through that process, each side could get, I really want to say it was 5 each for each reason, 5 with cause and 5 without. And basically they state going, okay, we are going to excuse this person for this reason. They will not be, they will be biased. They have a family member. I didn't like the way they answered that question. Whatever it is, they have to state that reason for what it is. And then the other side is where they don't have to state, like then they're allowed to do 5 where they don't. And they did far less of that one. I will say there was only like 2 people, I think 1 per side, or like 3 or 4 total, where they didn't give a reason. And I think they are encouraged to not do that, because that's kind of where biases and racism and bigotry and all the things there can play into it. Because there were 2 people up there that on the jury were either physically disabled, is that okay to say, or had a mental something of some kind. I don't want to say any further than that. No, I don't know what is okay to say or what isn't with something, but they both said that they were, they would be completely impartial. And one guy talked about how he had been bullied a lot because he physically looked different. Anyway, it was very interesting to see that and the way that they do that. And it was nice to see that they don't, because that was something I read online going into it, was like, technically they're not supposed to dismiss you because of your gender or race or anything that is a protected religious or whatever it is. They're not supposed to do that, but they still retain the right to just dismiss you for no reason stated. And that's where a lot of that happens. So I appreciate that they actually went through the process, whatever it was. Didn't tell any of us, didn't tell any reason there, but I don't know if it makes it into the record or if it was just a thing between them and the judge and somebody, I don't know. I feel that they, at least they said with reasons for them, I assume. I don't actually know how that works, but that's my assumption, is that somebody had to find out a reason, because they went through and they were very specific in saying one or the other. They just did not want to hurt people's feelings, I suppose, and they didn't want anyone to walk away from it being upset, because they did want to keep people's mind. I appreciated how they acknowledged that it was an inconvenience for people, and they wanted to get through it as quickly as possible, but they wanted to take their, they wanted to be fair and by the book and do the rules and everything. And then they mentioned both in the video and they're on both like twice or 3 times in the courtroom itself, talking about, if you're excused, that's fine. It's not an insult. It's not meant to be offensive. People see it as just getting out of it. Yeah, you did it. It shouldn't be like that. But not everybody's going to be fit for every trial. Not everybody can rule fairly on every single thing. Some people have history. Some people have never thought about it before. There's just reasons why not everybody's going to be fit for that. And I totally understood why that was a thing. And I appreciate that, at least if they didn't tell us, somebody heard a reason, even if it was just both sides up there with them doing the thing. I don't know the inside baseball, I think is the term for, like, I'd love to, I don't think legally it's allowed in any way, but it would be cool to have the full recording of everything, like a body cam footage from a lawyer on both sides doing the entire process start to finish. And I don't think, for reasons that because of on the record and off the record, they will ever be allowed. And, client, lawyer, what is it? Confidentiality, client privilege. What is it? Why can't I think of the terminology for that? There is something. There's, you can tell your lawyer something in confidence and they're not allowed to spread it to somebody else. They have to do their best to represent you, even knowing one way or the other they might know the true situation if it's different from what you're presenting as a defense in court. Anyway, client attorney privilege? Because there's doctor-patient confidentiality. It is different, a different word, but it almost means the same thing. Except, no, I think both sides still have the same rule of if you intend to harm another person, they will report that to the police. They're supposed to. Anyway, doesn't matter. That was the whole process. I think I really came out of it with a different understanding. I think if I were called for jury duty again, I would have the same kind of reaction of, all right, well, it's kind of a bummer. Not really what I want to do with my time, but I also respected enough to understand that somebody, that was the thing that I don't think anybody, even though they specifically asked each person during the first line of questioning, one of the final things that was asked of each person was simply, if you were on trial today, would you want someone like you on the jury? And I don't know how that didn't hit more people there, that's kind of the whole point of what's going on there. If I were on jury for something, if I was on trial for something, I would want people to be unbiased and hear the facts, regardless of whether, I would want them to be able to make a decision based on what was presented, and simply that, and not because of any other exterior, qualifiers. That's not fair. And it was interesting to see people's reactions to certain things there, and the fact that nobody, even though that was asked of every single person, there was still, it still had to be brought up a few times. It was interesting that didn't click for the people in the audience, right? Audience is not the right word to use, the gallery. For us who were waiting and watching and paying attention, for those who were. And the reason I was really paying attention is when I realized it was a criminal case. Because I think I may have mentioned before, but in my head, I do see, I can understand where people would say that there are frivolous lawsuits, and I totally understand that. It definitely happens. And the one that comes to mind immediately is the picture. I think there actually is a picture. It's become a point where I think about it and be like, yeah, that's ridiculous. And it was, a couple getting divorced, and having their pile of Beanie Babies that they were one at a time pulling out of and doing that. And it's like, this is a waste of time and this is ridiculous and everything. But I understand. I don't know how else. I don't have a better system. That's where I'm like, I might not agree with everything the justice system does and is, but I also don't have a better solution for it. And I might not enjoy being part of the process, but if I were called for jury duty again, it would be the same thing of all right, well, I would rather, I don't feel a civic duty. I don't feel a responsibility to my country or pride. None of that. I don't have any of that. I would leave this country in a heartbeat if I could legally get out of here, given the situation of everything that's been going on. I would love to visit somewhere else. I would love to move somewhere else, but it costs a lot of money, and I don't have the educational or skills required to get a green card somewhere else. I have looked into it. But anyway, just because I don't feel all of that, I also can feel at the very least that there is, besides everyone else, there's at least 10 people in that room who are doing their job, and they're just doing their job. And I totally get that. I have been in a situation where I'm just trying to do my job. Ma'am, this is just a Wendy's. I've never worked at a Wendy's, but essentially that, with customers who are just irate and whatever, and just general society and things like that. But at the very least, it boils down to those people just doing their job and one person or two sides trying to win an argument of what's happening here, and someone's life-changing events could be on the line as they go through the system. Pay attention. It's not that bad. And if you were ever in that situation, there's a lot of ignorance of people being like, oh, I never even thought about it until I think the easiest and biggest one there is someone who's throwing away or recycling something with no thought whatsoever to what happens after you put it in the bag and take it outside. And it's like, okay, if you put a light bulb or you've got broken glass or something, there are steps you can take so that the people who are having to deal with it throughout the rest of the process there aren't getting aren't putting themselves in danger because you didn't think about it beyond your 2 steps of what you have to do. That, I don't know a better explanation for that, but that very much is something that I think about with, like, clearly you don't ever have any foresight for the other people involved in this. You just don't even think about it that way. And there's a lot of that out there. And I don't think people in the courtroom, in the gallery, had the forethought of, like, oh, I could be up there answering those questions, even though they were told. And at the baseline of everything else, there's a man there who may be innocent or may be guilty. At least we don't really know. I mean, he's presumed innocent until proven otherwise. Pay attention, because that could affect his whole life. What if he was innocent to all of this? What if he was guilty? Regardless, pay attention. It's not that bad. So yeah, that was my entire process there. And it's interesting that I got jury duty. I've never had it before. This was the first time. I may never get it again. We'll see. I might start getting called every year because that happens. It's just random based off of driver's licenses and other things. I tried to figure out, but they really don't say specifically what it is. They just have a little frequently asked questions, which is like, yeah, it's random. It happens that some people never get it once in their life, and some people have to go almost every year or something, and it's just what it is. But my feelings on it definitely went in with, ugh, I don't want to, and came out with not even nearly that bad as what I was expecting, and also kind of important. Even if you have reasons to disagree with everything else, at the very base level, there is another human being who needs your help. Why would you do anything other than why would you do anything less than pay attention and follow the rules that are given and treat it with a amount of respect that it deserves? So, that was it. That was the whole process. Interesting. Glad I went through it. No regrets whatsoever. Not that I really had a choice. That's the other side of it, is that once you're called, you're called. Go in. I saw plenty of people talking about how to get out of it and how they don't want to. And sure, I may have been thinking about that I'm sure I said before I went into it that I was like, I'm sure they won't pick me and I have reasons and ways to get out of it. And I would not have probably gone through with any of those, but especially not in a jury panel with everyone there. On a one-on-one where it's more of a situation where I can tell a joke, I may have done a little bit of like, oh, maybe, but that's not how it works. So that's just an imaginary thing that would never take place. Because no, I didn't realize, basically it was more of everyone there and the judge. I definitely went into it thinking that when you're interviewed for it, it is just it is more of a small room and both sides of prosecution and defense are asking you questions. Did not realize it was a whole thing where you are under oath and it is the judge there talking to you and doing all that, because I don't think I've ever seen anything with the jury selection in it before. Most of what they depict on TV and movies, the jury has already been picked. And sometimes they've gotten to people on the jury. That's the other thing, the over dramatizing. It's really interesting to then go see the reality of what's some of it very interesting, some of it not so much. Or some of it, some of the things I've seen on movies and TVs are fairly realistic to the stuff, and some of it not so much. That's what I was trying to say. Anyway, I think I'll wrap this up now. That was jury duty in the year 2025 in the county that I live in. All righty. Bye, everybody. Objection.